Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
And welcome in to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, BSP, Brandon Soderpenner, and guys, it is running back rankings day. That is right. Finally finished going through all of the running back previews for the individual teams in the NFL, and today I will give you my top 30 ranked running backs. That's right, 30 guys. I had originally promised 25. After tooling around with it a little bit, I decided to add an extra 5 players on. So you're going to get my top 30 fantasy running backs for 2020 today. On top of that, though, it's going to be a jam-packed show, guys. We're actually going to do the formatting just a little bit different today. So this first segment, I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of what the show is going to look like moving forward. I'm actually going to give you my top 10. I usually do this at the end of the show, but I want to have the last 2 segments today be devoted to those running back rankings. So I'm going to give you my top 10 dynasty players right here in the very first segment today. Going to follow it up with 5 burning questions in the second segment, and then the whole second half of the show, like I mentioned, is going to be devoted to running through the running back rankings for 2020. So the show moving forward, I just wanted to give you guys a preview of what you can be looking out for as we continue the podcast. First off, next episode, I'm going to start diving into the wide receiver core previews. It's going to be just like I was doing with the running backs, where I'm going to go division by division. I'm going to do 2 divisions a day, and we're going to examine the different wide receiver situations for each of those teams, looking at guys that we know are going to be fantasy studs, other players that might be breakouts, players that are going to be able to be productive as a second or a third wide receiver. We will cover all of that. After that, we will do another episode like I'm doing today, where I'll give you my definitive top 30 wide receivers. After that, we're going to follow it up. We're going to do quarterbacks and tight ends together, just because I feel like it would be a little bit of a waste to devote an entire segment to just quarterbacks, right? Because there's obviously only going to be one legitimate starter per team. So we're going to do quarterbacks and tight ends together. And then after we are finished with that, now, this is going to be very exciting. I'm going to do a live mock draft on August 22nd. I'm going to throw on a draft simulator and talk you guys through the entire process. I'm not going to practice with it beforehand. I'm just going to sit down, let the draft come to me as if I was sitting with, a group like you guys are going to be doing here very soon. It'll be a fun exercise just to see what players are sitting there, what players are going to go above or below their ADP. So, again, that's going to be a lot of fun. That show right now is scheduled for August 22nd, assuming that everything goes as planned up to that point. So a lot of great things to look forward to with the podcast. And, again, I'm very excited, guys. We've got a groove going here now. You're going to have all the rankings that you need by the time we get to that draft. I guess one more side note before I get too far. As far as doing these the preview series, I'm not going to do it for defense or kicker. Not that there's not any value in those positions, but I know you guys don't want to hear me sit here and drone on about positions that not a lot of people are particularly interested in. So I will spare you guys that. But yeah, like I said, so wide receivers, next few episodes. After that, it's going to be quarterbacks and tight ends for the preview series. And then finally the mock draft on August 22nd. All right, guys. So as promised, every episode I give you a top 10. And this week going to be top 10 dynasty players for you. Players to target in your dynasty leagues. Obviously going to be a little bit different. The rankings are going to be adjusted compared to the standard fantasy league just because you have to balance being competitive now and being competitive in the years to come. You want to really look at a 3 to 4 year window when you're drafting dynasty teams. So there is going to be a little bit of bias towards players that are younger and have real breakout potential. You're not going to see guys like Tom Brady typically get drafted, or, just older players, AJ Green even, are guys that have a lot less value in Dynasty as opposed to the Standard League. So here we go, guys. We're going to start off number 10, a guy you've heard me talk about plenty, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Like I said, this year he's going to get a ton of volume in that Chiefs offense, and that's only going to continue for years to come. He's legitimately a rookie. So even if they decide to get rid of him after his rookie deal, which seems to be a little bit of a trend with running backs, you're still going to get 4 years out of the guy. So he's a very safe dynasty pick here. He's going to be able to produce for you right away and help you stay competitive in the future. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a no-brainer for dynasty leagues this year. Number 9, actually, his Chiefs teammate Tyreek Hill, another guy who's pretty young. His contract is coming up soon. However, when you look at the speed that Tyreek Hill has, even if for some reason the Chiefs were to move on from him, he's still going to maintain value. And as long as he's there with Patrick Mahomes, he's going to remain one of his favorite targets. He'll get plenty of opportunity downfield. I was dealing with some injuries last year. I don't think you have to worry about that too much this year. We'll obviously see. But Tyreek Hill is a dangerous field stretcher. And when you combine that with all the other weapons on the team, defenses can't solely focus on containing Tyreek Hill because Patrick Mahomes will just make you pay in other places. So you're going to see him get open. You're going to see him score quite a bit. He will be frustrating at times because Tyreek Hill is not the most consistent receiver in the world. He's not a possession guy, so he's not going to just regularly get you, 10 points, 10 points, 10 points. He is going to be a little boom or bust, but when he booms, it's going to be crazy. Again, the guy's got a ton of upside and fantasy value. So Tyreek Hill at number 9 for me for Dynasty. Number 8, another wide receiver. That's DeAndre Hopkins for Arizona. Now, there are a couple questions this year as he moves to a new team. We don't know how much time he's going to have to really acclimate with Kyler Murray and the rest of that Arizona offense. However, DeAndre Hopkins has proven that he can produce even with suspect quarterback play. I mean, we saw him still be able to put up numbers with, I don't remember if Matt Schaub was there at the end with him, but, I mean, Brandon Weeden, I don't even remember anybody that was there. Like, he did not have any solid quarterbacks until Deshaun Watson came along, and he was still producing as a top 5 wide receiver. So while there might still be a couple question marks around Kyler Murray, he at least played well enough last year to secure Rookie of the Year. He showed plenty of promise, and I think that's enough to know that him and DeAndre Hopkins are going to be able to get something going. So Hopkins will definitely be a legitimate target for you. Even in Dynasty, he's a little bit older, but he's still a relatively young player. So you're going to still have plenty of years of DeAndre Hopkins, even though he's not a rookie, or he's not only on his first or second year. He's still got plenty of time left for you. So I love DeAndre Hopkins there at number 8. Number 7 is Joe Mixon. You saw that I had him ranked pretty highly on my running back rankings. He's still young. I believe he's on his first contract. I'm not sure that they've extended Mixon yet, so that's going to come up soon. I don't think he's going to have an issue getting paid. He had a lot of doubt around him coming into the league because he did have those off-the-field issues with the domestic violence cases, but those have not seemed to crop up again. It seems like he has been on his best behavior, so to speak. So it doesn't seem like you have to worry about Mixon staying on the field from that perspective. He's also been incredibly healthy since he's come back into the league, never really missing any time. And we've seen him year after year continue to chip away and take over that starting spot. And this year now, with Giovanni Bernard, being another year closer to 30, being less and less effective every year, I think this is the year that Joe Mixon really takes that number 1 role. He's not going to have a lot of competition for touches, and he's going to be one of the highest scoring running backs in the league. They're going to lean on him quite a bit. We've also got Joe Burrow now at quarterback. That's going to help open up that offense for him. So Joe Mixon is set to have a fantastic year. And again, he's another one of those guys. He's relatively young. So you're going to be able to get a lot of value out of him this year and moving forward. So again, big fan of Joe Mixon for Dynasty. Number 6, Michael Thomas. Now he's a little bit lower on this list for me than he is for some people. And that's just because I am worried about that quarterback situation moving forward. They seem to think that, or Sean Payton was at least talking about Taysom Hill being the franchise guy. He made a mention that their quarterback was already on the roster. That was before they brought Jameis Winston in, so maybe Winston's throwing the ball next year. I kind of like the prospect there because even though Winston's a gunslinger that isn't really worried about the consequences of throwing interceptions, he still puts up a ton of volume. I mean, he threw the ball enough to where 2 of his receivers, in Godwin and Evans, were top 5 in yards by the end of the year, which is absolutely nuts. So Michael Thomas, I think, could do pretty well if Winston takes over. But outside of that, I mean, it's just a little bit unclear. So that's the only reason I have him down at number 6. He's very young. He's going to be a solid dynasty piece. It's just going to be based on who's throwing him the ball, because after this year, I don't think it's going to be Drew Brees. Outside of that, though, it's pretty self-explanatory, guys. Michael Thomas is the best wide receiver in the league. He hasn't shown that we need to be worried about him from an injuries perspective, and he's just going to be a guy that you can plug and play every week, and you're just not going to have to worry about him getting those fantasy points for you. So tying into that a little bit, actually, I like Alvin Kamara just a little bit more than I do Michael Thomas, just because the running back situation, even though Kamara does get a lot of his fantasy points through the air, it's not nearly as affected by the quarterback position as wide receiver is going to be. So even if Taysom Hill or Jameis is at the quarterback position next year, Alvin Kamara is still going to be able to produce. He's an excellent runner of the football. He will be still utilized. I mean, even if you have a bad quarterback in there, like if Taysom Hill ends up starting and he's just not great, which I don't think he will be, Alvin Kamara will provide a nice little safety valve option for him. So I don't think you'll see much of a fantasy drop-off at all there. And again, Alvin Kamara is young. If I remember right, he came out in the same draft as Michael Thomas. So you've got plenty of years left on the tires with Alvin Kamara. You've got a pretty good offensive line down there in New Orleans as well. So he's another great guy that'll help you out this year and provides plenty of value going forward as well. So number 4, this is probably my biggest jump between Dynasty and standard players this year. That's Nick Chubb. Next year, Nick Chubb will be a top 3 fantasy option. He may be the number 1 fantasy running back. What is holding him back is the fact that Kareem Hunt is still in that offense. Kareem Hunt has made mention that he wouldn't mind staying in Cleveland, but he's going to be demanding running back 1 money. I think we all know that at this point. He's already been an RB1, and he's definitely poised to be able to handle that kind of workload again, and I don't see the Browns being willing to invest that kind of money in him and then also still keep Nick Chubb and Odell Beckham and Myles Garrett, who they're getting ready to pay now. It just doesn't really make sense for them. Kareem Hunt's kind of a luxury piece for the Browns right now, so I fully expect him to be gone by 2021. Once he's gone, there is no competition for touches for Nick Chubb. He is going to be the workhorse back that we saw him be at the beginning of 2019 until Kareem Hunt's suspension was over. The guy was an absolute stud. Even with Kareem Hunt coming back, he was only a few yards away from being the rushing yards leader in the NFL. The offensive line is improving in Cleveland as well. It's better than it was when he did have that monster season last year. So 2021 is really the lookout that you have for Nick Chubb, but I highly suggest you try to grab him in these dynasty drafts because while he may be a little limited this year, he's going to absolutely explode in 2021. I'm a big fan of Nick Chubb, but again, got to put him at number 4 just because he will not be a top guy this year because of Kareem Hunt. Number 3, Ezekiel Elliott. I know, guys, this was my number 1 running back when we were talking about standard leagues. I've got him down at number 3 just because he's a little bit older than the other 2 guys here. He does have an excellent offensive line. He's going to produce very well for you this year. It's just you're not going to get as many years out of him as you will get out of Saquon Barkley or Christian McCaffrey, who I have above him. So I still believe he's going to be the best of those guys this year, but he does have the potential to lose that top spot as both of these other players continue to develop. Saquon Barkley, then obviously number 2, he's only getting better year after year. The only reason he wasn't my running back, or wasn't higher on my running back list initially, is because the team is a little suspect at the moment. You have to imagine the Giants are going to continue to get better. I guess we don't know that for sure. You got Daniel Jones in there starting to develop a little bit. The offensive line is still pretty suspect. But we do know Saquon Barkley is going to be featured in that offense until he's not. I mean, he's the focal point. They don't really seem to have any plans to move on from him, and why would you? The guy's going into his 3rd year, so he'll be an absolute stud for you in Dynasty. And then number 1 for Dynasty, Christian McCaffrey. Again, just got his 2nd contract. I'm worried about him this year because of the potential of him getting pulled off the field while the Panthers are tanking and trying to get one of those top-tier quarterbacks out of the draft. But after that, when the Panthers do start rebuilding, when they have Trevor Lawrence in there, when they have Justin Fields, I think Christian McCaffrey's value is just going to skyrocket even more. And again, while he may bite you this year, he's not going to do that every year. The Panthers are not going to be in tank mode forever. So when they're not, Christian McCaffrey is an absolutely dangerous player. You can see him get it done through the air and on the ground. He's a guy that you always have to account for. And again, once he has a better quarterback in and the team is not tanking, he is going to be a stud. I mean, he already is, but he's going to be even more so. And again, I love Christian McCaffrey going forward. It was just this year that I was a little bit worried about him. So again, guys, Christian McCaffrey, my number 1 dynasty player if you are starting up your dynasty league this year. When we come back, guys, we've got your 5 burning questions for today's episode, and then we will start diving into our running back rankings. That is right, the top 30 running backs for fantasy in 2020. I can't wait to get into this with you guys. You are listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, and we'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, BSP, Brandon Soderpenner. If you didn't listen to the first segment, guys, go back. We're doing the formatting a little bit differently this week. I went ahead and did our top 10 list in the very first segment. So if you're skipping forward, go back, take a listen to that. I went over my top 10 dynasty players for 2020. Now, moving on, guys, we're going to address the 5 burning questions in this segment, and then, of course, the second half of the show will be completely devoted to my top 30 running backs for 2020. We will go through all these players individually, talk about what I like, what I don't like. I'll even throw in a couple bonuses for you guys, talk about some players that I like outside of the top 30, and some guys that just didn't quite make the cut there for me. So here we go, 5 burning questions for this week. As you know, you can always submit your questions to either me or the show. You can find me on Twitter at LaMachine17. That's LaMachine17. And then, of course, the show itself is at GSMC_F football. So go ahead, find us on Twitter, submit your questions, let me know what you want us to talk about. It's not just me either, guys. I'm sure you've seen I host 2 days a week. We have a bunch of other excellent hosts on the show as well that would love to be able to dive in and answer the questions that you are worried about going in to the 2020 fantasy season. All right, so enough stalling for you guys. 5 burning questions for today's episode. Now that we're starting to shift into wide receivers, I decided to focus on them a little bit with today's segment. So I'm going to start off with a very similar question to when we started doing the running back preview, and that is Michael Thomas the clear-cut number 1 receiver? And just like I said for Christian McCaffrey, no, he is not clear-cut. There is not a giant gap here that I think people are expecting. Yes, Michael Thomas is the number 1 receiver. This is not something I'm going to change my mind on like I did with McCaffrey. However, Julio Jones is always there and will always be a threat. You also have to take a look at the respective quarterback situations. I'm not going to sit here and argue with you that Matt Ryan is a better quarterback than Drew Brees, especially not in the long term. It's not comparable. But this year, he might be. Each year we see Drew Brees start to struggle a little bit more and more as the season goes on. It's like that he gets a little bit of dead arm. He's not able to push the ball down the field like he was at the beginning of the season. We've also seen injuries start to crop up here and there for Drew Brees. So if Brees were to go down, I think that dramatically hurts Michael Thomas's value. Now, the one saving grace for Michael Thomas is the fact that they do have Jameis Winston there now to back up Drew Brees. So there won't be a dramatic drop. However, I will take Matt Ryan with Julio Jones over Jameis Winston with Michael Thomas any day. Jameis Winston, I don't trust. He likes to take a lot of risks, and it worked for Godwin and Evans last year, but I think that was an anomaly season to be able to throw 30 interceptions and still be the league's leader in passing yards. It's just absolutely nuts. So if you have Winston in there, I think Thomas's value drops a little bit. And again, this is the only real reason that I have some reservations about Thomas as the number 1 receiver. Now, with all of his upside and with having those 2 quarterbacks there, yes, still take Michael Thomas number 1. But again, he's just not a completely clear-cut kind of guy. I think Julio is going to have a chance to be the wide receiver 1 this year as well. People are drafting Devontae Adams as the number 2 right now. You guys know my feelings on him. I don't think that Packers offense is going to be conducive to propelling him to that spot where he's being drafted, because I think it's going to be kind of a mess up there in Green Bay. But yeah, Michael Thomas is the number 1 guy, but there are definitely other prospects that could finish as the number 1 receiver this year that you should be looking out for. So now number 2, sticking with wide receivers. Which wide receivers do you think will be hurt most by their quarterback situation? So obviously neither of the guys that I just brought up, Julio or Michael Thomas, are going to have anything to worry about. Maybe if Matt Ryan gets hurt, I have no idea who the backup is in Atlanta, but he's stayed very healthy throughout his career, so that's not something I think they're going to have to worry about. But there are definitely some guys that are going to be hurt by their quarterback situation in 2020. So I'll start with, I did ranking of 3 here. So number 3 is going to be Stephon Diggs. Again, we've gone through this scenario a couple times. You would think that having Josh Allen and that incredible arm would help him out, but Josh Allen has just proven to be incredibly inaccurate down the field. He has not been effective as a downfield passer. Again, the statistics show that he was the worst in the league in 2019. Stephon Diggs does have some value in getting some of those underneath routes and just taking off. He's got plenty of speed, so he will still have some fantasy value. Don't get me wrong there, but I think it's definitely going to drop off compared to when he had Kirk Cousins as his quarterback up in Minnesota. Number 3 is Allen Robinson. Now, Allen Robinson still had, I want to say it was like 170 targets last year, which is absolutely crazy. But that Bears offense is going to be garbage. There's no other way to say it. Especially if Nick Foles goes in there. We know Nick Foles likes to target a lot of his underneath guys. I think that's going to hurt Allen Robinson quite a bit. I don't see Mitch Trubisky taking a step forward at this point. So it really does seem that the trajectory is for Nick Foles to step in there as the starter. And I'm really not that interested in taking an X or a Y receiver when I've got Foles at quarterback. They just traditionally have not done well with him back there. And on top of that, we've only really seen Foles have success in that RPO style of offense that they ran in Philadelphia. He really hasn't shown that he can produce anywhere else. So Allen Robinson, I think, is definitely going to be affected, really no matter who's in there. We know Trubisky at least likes to target him, but neither of those guys really scream, good fantasy production. So I think Allen Robinson is definitely going to be hurt by that quite a bit this year. But number one, guys, and it shouldn't be incredibly surprising, that's Keenan Allen. Allen is an excellent receiver, but he's going to be just killed by the fact that they have Tyrod Taylor running that offense right now. Taylor's never thrown more than 20 touchdowns in a season. I think he also knows that he's not going to be the guy moving forward. They drafted Justin Herbert. He's eventually going to take over that job. So even when Herbert takes over at some point this year, I don't generally trust rookie quarterbacks either to help people produce around him. So Keenan Allen just has a lot of question marks this year. We know what Tyrod Taylor is. He's not going to be a guy that pushes the ball down the field a lot. And then Justin Herbert, we just don't know how he's going to perform quite yet. The fact that they're still looking to start Tyrod over him in week 1 shows me that he's not quite ready. And when they do put him in inevitably, I really don't see him taking over the world by storm right off the bat. So again, Keenan Allen's value is very, very diminished by that quarterback situation out in Los Angeles. All right, so number 3, again, last question for the wide receivers. Which wide receiver groups are you most intrigued by? So I just took a quick look. I haven't started my deep dive into all the wide receivers quite yet, but there are a few wide receiver rooms that are interesting to me. Number 3 being Cleveland. You've got Odell Beckham Jr., who was incredibly disappointing in 2019, and then Jarvis Landry, who actually outperformed Odell Beckham despite being the wide receiver 2 in Cleveland's offense. I'm interested to see how Odell Beckham Jr. bounces back. I'm excited about that prospect, and I think he's absolutely going to as the team continues to improve around him and as he recovers from his injury. But then Jarvis Landry as well. He's a guy that, for whatever reason, is always undervalued going into fantasy drafts, and he's never really finished worse than like a wide receiver 15. He always puts up numbers. He's not a sexy pick by any means. He's not going to go out and get you the flashy catches or get you those YouTube highlights or anything like that, but he's a solid possession receiver, going to get you 1,000 yards receiving, a handful of touchdowns, and he's just going to be reliable. So I'm interested to see how those two guys play off each other this year. Number 2 is Houston. Houston is intriguing just because I don't know who's going to really step up and be the number 1 guy there. You have Deshaun Watson at quarterback. So no matter what, there's going to be a receiver there or 2 that produce incredibly well. I mean, the guy is a top-tier quarterback, but you've got Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller as the 2 presumptive guys right now that could be those target getters. If it was just about ability, I like Will Fuller a lot, but he has shown that he has injury issues. I don't know if he's played a full season in his career. He is just constantly plagued by these little nagging injuries that take him out for 2-3 games at a time. So it's been hard to trust him up to this point. And then Brandon Cooks has had some concussion issues as well. I'm not quite as worried about the injuries with him. He's never been a top-tier guy. He's not going to win you your league year in and year out, but he's always been consistent, and he's been able to do it with multiple quarterbacks. So maybe Deshaun Watson is the guy that's really able to unlock him. Especially if Fuller misses time, Cooks is going to be that clear-cut number 1 option. So I'm just interested to see that wide receiver situation develop throughout the year, and I really haven't decided which one of those guys I would take first at this point. And then number 1 is Dallas. Dallas is absolutely stacked when it comes to wide receiver. Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb, who they just drafted this year. I know Cooper's going to get his share of everything, but after the strong season Michael Gallup had in 2019, I'm interested to see how much CeeDee Lamb starts to eat into that, or if Gallup is a legitimate fantasy option. I know a lot of people have been split on this from the beginning. A lot of people either think that Gallup is going to be lost completely with Lamb being in the offense now. A lot of people still think he's going to get a large majority of touches while Lamb develops. It's just I'm unsure at this point. I want to dive into it more. They spent a first-round pick on Lamb. I want to say he was the 17th or 18th overall pick. So they obviously believe in the guy, and it's going to be an interesting wide receiver room as it starts to develop throughout the year. All right, now number 4, going to move off the wide receivers. I had mentioned that I'm not going to do a deep dive into all of the defenses or kickers like I've been doing with running back and then wide receiver next week. So I did want to go ahead and talk about who my number one fantasy defense is for 2020. Now, San Francisco is an excellent option. You've got a lot of people high on Kansas City and Pittsburgh this year. Personally, I'm a big fan of Buffalo. The only reason I don't like San Francisco as the number one is because they have a very tough strength schedule this year. They've got to play Seattle twice. They've got to play Arizona twice. Los Angeles is still dangerous. So you've got a lot of potential for teams to put up a ton of points on them, even though they are a stout defense. When I look at Buffalo, not only are they a balanced team, but their strength of schedule isn't that bad. I mean, you've got the Patriots twice still, now with Cam Newton. But Miami doesn't scare me at all, and the Jets obviously don't either. You've also looked at Buffalo's team, right? They're balanced. They're going to run the ball a lot. They're going to keep their defense off the field, and that's what you want with a good defense, honestly, guys. It's rare that you get that Chicago, I want to say it's 2016 Chicago Bears or like a 2012 Seattle Seahawks where they're going to get you a ton of points because of all the turnovers. Generally with defenses, you just want to make sure that they're not allowing a ton of points. So with Buffalo's defense constantly being out there and being fresh and still having one of the better secondaries in the league, I'm just a big fan of what they can do for your fantasy team. You never really have to be worried about setting them in there. They don't have a ton of matchups that I'd be really worried about, and even the games they lose are going to be close games. So I'm a huge fan of Buffalo's defense this year. If I'm able to, I'm definitely going to try to target them later on in my drafts. If not, I'm not too worried about it. I don't mind flying a defense if I have to. But, yeah, Buffalo, easily my pick for this year. All right, so number 5. This is the off-the-wall question. Always like to end it on a little bit of a lighter note. This one came from Michael Tournaman, who sent me a message on Facebook. And the question was, light side versus dark side. Who wins a football game in the Star Wars universe? So I had a lot of fun breaking this one down. So obviously we have two teams, one fantasy lineup composed of just light side and one of just dark side. And we're going to have them go head-to-head. So let me just give you the full breakdown here, guys. On the light side at quarterback, we've got Han Solo. I think it's a pretty easy one. He's a gunslinger. He's a leader. He's the guy with an attitude that you want back there at quarterback. Very Brett Favre type of guy. So Han Solo quarterback for sure. Running back, got Ray Palpatine. Yes, Palpatine, not Skywalker. Not going to get into that right now. Again, another strong leader with great force powers. I think she'll be able to power her way through the line and just absolutely move people out of the way. At running back, too, we've got BB-8. Nice little change of pace back. This really small droid is going to be hard to hit. I think he'll be able to sneak through offensive lines and be able to get you some real production out of the passing game. And again, just as that kind of spell running back, like that a lot. At wide receiver, I've got Obi-Wan Kenobi and Master Yoda. So Kenobi is your more standard wide receiver, a little bit taller. He's going to have good catch radius, strong force ability. And then Yoda, being as small as he is, I like him coming out of the slot. Again, strong force pull. I think he'll be able to kind of bring in any pass that you throw at him. So I like him at that wide receiver 2 spot. Tight end is Chewbacca. I mean, he's a freaking Wookiee. He's gigantic. This was an easy pick here. He's just going to be able to shove people out of the way. Very easy downfield target, and he's going to have that automatic chemistry with Han Solo as well. At flex, I've got Luke Skywalker. Skywalker being the presumptive most powerful force user on the light side. I think you can really use him anywhere on the field, whether that be at running back, at tight end, wide receiver. He's a real nice chess piece and a little bit of a secret weapon to be able to use on that offense. So I like Luke at the flex. Kicker, Jar Jar Binks. I had to find somewhere to put him, guys. I don't have any actual explanation as to why I think he could kick in NFL football. But yeah, you got Jar Jar at kicker. You take it or leave it. And then for defense, you've got the Clone Army for the light side. It was either the Clone Army or the Rebels. Just the fact that you can produce an unlimited number of clones and they're all based off of Jango Fett is terrifying. So give me the Clone Army as the defense for the light side. Now over to the dark side, all right? So at quarterback, we got Darth Vader. Again, the presumptive, one of either him or Sidious are going to be the strongest force user on the dark side. He's also a little bit younger than Sidious, so I think he's going to have that solid arm strength that you need at quarterback. And he's a leader because everyone's just absolutely terrified of him. So I like him there at quarterback. At running back, Darth Maul. I mean, it's in the name. He's going to maul people, guys. He's just going to run them over. Very powerful, quick and agile. You see with the whole two lightsaber fighting style, he's got some good moves there. So I like him at running back. Darth Sidious at my running back 2 spot. I had to find a spot for him. Even though he is old, he doesn't move particularly well. He's so strong with the Force that, again, he can just literally separate the line and do whatever he wants with them. So he will have some value there at the running back, too. Wide receivers, I almost said brothers, Boba and Jango Fett, guys. You get 2 wide receivers with jetpacks. They've obviously got the speed that you need, and are both going to be absolutely dangerous downfield, so that'd be a lot of fun to watch those 2. At tight end, I got General Grievous. Again, large target, no force ability, but he's gigantic and he has 4 arms. He's going to be able to literally catch anything that you throw at him. At the flex spot, I like Captain Phasma. Phasma's just an absolute badass, so I think wherever you put her on the field, she's going to be able to produce. At kicker is Kylo Ren. I feel like he's emo and weird enough to where, kicking might actually be something that he's good at, because I don't really know what else he is good at. And then Stormtroopers for the defense. It was either droids or Stormtroopers. The droids kind of got their asses kicked in the first 3 movies, so I wasn't huge on that. So the Stormtroopers going to be the defense. Obviously a weak point for the team. They can't really hit anything. So that's concerning. But when I look at the lineups as a whole, guys, the dark side wins this. I'm sorry. I want the good guys to win, but you've got 2 players with freaking jetpacks at wide receiver. You have no way to stop that. Darth Vader at quarterback, Grievous, again, 4 arms as a tight end. How do you defend him? There's really no way to do it, right? Just when you look at the lineup as a whole, the light side will put up a fight, but the Star Wars villains have it here, guys. If they were to play a hypothetical game of football, the dark side comes out as the winner. So I hope you enjoyed my way too in-depth breakdown of a football game in the Star Wars universe. But again, I had a lot of fun with it. I hope you guys did too. But anyway, guys, that is the first half of the show in the books. When we come back, I will give you my top 30 running backs for 2020. It's going to be the last 2 segments. Next segment, I'll give you 30 to 16, and the last segment, 15 to number 1. You are listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome into the second half of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Of course, I am your host, BSP, Brandon Soderpenner. So at this point, guys, we have finally arrived to my definitive running back rankings for 2020. Now, I know I had originally promised giving my top 25. I kind of decided to retool things a little bit. I'm actually going to add an additional 5 players on for you. So we're going to go through my top 30 fantasy running backs this year. Hopefully you've had a chance to listen to some of the other pods previously. I've been taking a deeper dive into each team's running back situation, going division by division. So I've kind of already given a little bit of a background about how I feel about these guys, how I feel about the situations that they are in at the moment. But now going to definitively rank them out for you, again, as you start to prepare for your draft, get the guys that you like in order, figure out who you want to take where. This is how I'm going to lay it out for myself. So before we dive into the top 30, there's a couple guys that didn't quite make the cut that I know a lot of people may have in their top-tier players. For starters, probably the highest on most people's list right now that I didn't include in the top 30 was Raheem Mostert. The issue that I'm having with Mostert has nothing to do with his current situation and everything to do with his potential future now that he has demanded a trade away from San Francisco. If he were to stay in that offense, I think he had a chance to be the legitimate number one. I know Shanahan likes to run with a running back committee type of approach, but he is the most talented back on that team, and he would have produced. Now that he has asked for a trade, what makes me nervous is that he never really fit in with any other team throughout his career. He's been bounced around the league quite a bit and was finally able to get some production once he landed in San Francisco. So if he were to leave that offense, I question how productive he could really be somewhere else. So again, that just makes me a little bit nervous with Raheem Mostert. So he's now out of my top 30 just because of that potential of him getting traded. If something comes out and he decides that he's going to stick it out one more year in San Francisco, then he bumps up again significantly, and we're talking about a guy that may be somewhere in the mid-20s as far as running back rankings go. So we're going to keep an eye on that situation. Cam Akers, another one for me that didn't make the top 30. He has a legitimate path to the number one job in Los Angeles, but I am worried about his actual ability there. I'm worried about that offensive line. And you look at what people were saying about Cam Akers when he came out of Florida State. He had issues with production. He lacked production in his final year at Florida State, and people said, oh, it's because of the offensive line. It was not great. Well, it's not going to be great in Los Angeles either. And the players are only getting tougher on the other side of the ball. So I need to see it for a year from Cam Akers before I'm willing to put him up in my top 30 running backs. Next, Sony Michel. Sony Michel has just underwhelmed since he came into the league. He seems to sit around this ranking every year, somewhere between 35 and 25. I don't see him getting a crazy workload this year, especially with Cam Newton there now. I think they're going to throw the ball a little bit more or rely on Cam Newton's legs and then utilizing James White out of the backfield a lot more than they're going to use Sony Michel. And Sony Michel coming off another injury as well. He had injury issues coming out of college. There's just a lot of things that are kind of piling against him that I'm not huge about. So Sony Michel out of my top 30. And then finally, Darius Geis. Darius Geis is a guy that I am avoiding, period. Like, I don't care where he's sitting in my draft. He is the presumptive number one running back in Washington right now, but his lack of production and his injury history have really kind of started compiling. And with Antonio Gibson there now and Adrian Peterson even there to spell him a little bit, even if he's not cut, which he might be, guys, he may be cut from this team, his production is going to be incredibly limited. And on top of that, it's just not a great offense as a whole in Washington. So Darius Geis also dropping out of my top 30. All right, so now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and start diving into the top 30. So at number 30 for me is Phillip Lindsay. I've got him about 9 spots above average right now. Personally, I believe that Lindsay is going to still be a focal part of this offense, especially early on in the season. Melvin Gordon coming in is going to be the clear-cut number one back. However, just given Phillip Lindsay's production in 2019 and the fact that Gordon is going to have a very limited amount of time to acclimate to this offense due to COVID and due to the lack of training camp, everything like that, I just see Lindsay having a very solid workload. This may actually carry throughout the year, depending on how well he does at the start, but he's going to be given the opportunity, and I think if given the opportunity, Lindsay is going to make the most of it, and he's going to be a legitimate fantasy option for you as a running back 2 or 3. So Phillip Lindsay sitting at number 30 for me, I think is a very solid pick. You might be able to get him much later than this because a lot of people are worried about his workload with Melvin Gordon coming in, but a very safe pick for me. So number 29 is going to be Jordan Howard. running back for the Miami Dolphins. There is a little bit of uncertainty right now as to who the number one back is going to be in Miami between him and Matt Breida. However, given how poor the offensive line is in Miami still, I think that Jordan Howard has the better chance to take the job. Jordan Howard is a lot more of a hard-nosed, just hit somebody pad-to-pad kind of runner than Matt Breida is, and I think that's going to bode well for him given the state of that offensive line. He was also probably already going to be slated to get the majority of the goal line touches, being that type of power back. So Jordan Howard is going to be a good option for you week to week, especially matchup-based. He could be a guy that gets you a couple of touchdowns with very good value as to where he is being selected. So 29 for me, Jordan Howard. Now 27 and 28 actually kind of go together here. So I've got J.K. Dobbins at 28 and Mark Ingram at 27, both running backs for Baltimore. J.K. Dobbins, the rookie coming in out of Ohio State, was drafted in the second round by Baltimore, and then Mark Ingram, who had an excellent year last year. These guys are a lot closer than I think people realize. J.K. Dobbins is being taken about 10 running backs after Mark Ingram still. Mark Ingram is going to regress a little bit because he had a very high touchdown total in 2019. I think he's already going to surrender some of those to Lamar Jackson, who only had 4 rushing touchdowns, which for the amount that he ran and how effective he was very low for him. He's also older. He's approaching 30 now. They drafted J.K. Dobbins for a reason. I think Baltimore sees the same thing. So by the middle of the year, I see these guys splitting carries, and by the end of the year, I think you're going to see J.K. Dobbins take over the job completely. Both of these guys do have really good fantasy value. Mark Ingram is not a bad running back by any means. That's not what I'm saying. I still have him a spot above J.K. Dobbins. However, they drafted Dobbins to be the future of the team. I think they're both going to be featured quite a bit this year and can both provide you some good fantasy value. But by the end of the year, J.K. Dobbins is going to be the guy, and I firmly believe he's going to be a top 10 drafted running back at the start of next year. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Baltimore were to move on from Mark Ingram at the end of 2020 as well. So I've got those guys grouped together there. Number 26 is Devin Singletary. It was kind of hard for me to put him here. I have not been high on Devin Singletary whatsoever throughout this entire offseason. Even last year when he was really the only back that they featured in Buffalo, he was middling at best. He does have it going for him that Buffalo was going to want to run the ball a lot. So even though he's not the most talented back in the league, he's going to get legitimate volume. He has Zach Moss to deal with right now as well, who Buffalo drafted this year. His role is still relatively undefined, so I don't think he's going to eat into Singletary's carries too much. He does have a chance to be a really good handcuff if Singletary were to go down. I do think he's more talented, but Singletary has carved out his role in this offense. He's a middling option, but that's not necessarily a bad thing when you're talking about drafting running backs. So he's a guy that you can rely on to get you 10, 12 points every week. So there is some real value with him, even though Singletary's never going to be the home run hitter. He's not going to be a guy that wins you your league week from week, but he's someone that you can plug in and just really not worry about. So that's why I've got him at 26. Number 25 is DeAndre Swift, the running back in Detroit, another rookie that has made this list. I think that J.K. Dobbins is the better runner out of these two, but DeAndre Swift has the more clear-cut path to start taking running back 1 carries this year. They do still have Kerryon Johnson, but he's missed almost half of the games that he's been eligible for with injury. When he has been in, he's been decent, but he hasn't blown anybody away. DeAndre Swift, it is also worth noting, has had injury issues throughout his college career, but he is presumptively more healthy coming into the 2020 season than Kerryon Johnson. Johnson's still dealing with some lingering injuries, so Swift can very easily take over that feature back role. And if that happens sooner rather than later, I mean, DeAndre Swift could shoot up even further on this list. The only reason I have him at 25 right now is just because Kerryon Johnson is there and will probably take some workload from him. But Swift is definitely going to end up being the running back 1 in Detroit. It's just a matter of when they decide they're going to start taking those touches away from Johnson. So sitting at 24 now, we have David Montgomery, the running back for the Chicago Bears. The more I've looked at him, I've actually started to warm up to David Montgomery. He kind of fits the Jordan Howard role that Chicago had previously. Now, Jordan Howard had an excellent rookie season, but then kind of took a step back when Tariq Cohen came into the fold. And that chance exists still now with Tariq Cohen still there. But Montgomery, a little bit younger than Howard, I think they may have learned from some of the mistakes that they made utilizing Jordan Howard. You could still get a solid 20 carries from him with Montgomery. He is going to take on that traditional running back role. There's going to be opportunity there for him. So I do have him a little bit lower than most, a few spots, just because Tariq Cohen is still there. Nick Foles is most likely going to be the quarterback there in Chicago, so I think he's going to utilize Tariq Cohen a lot more. We know Nick Foles likes to take advantage of his slot receivers, his backs, this short target kind of guy, so that will take something away from David Montgomery. But again, this guy is still young, only going into his second season. He can break out. He's got breakout potential, and he will get volume despite the fact that Tariq Cohen is there. So he is my 24th running back on my ranking. Number 23, I had to put him somewhere, is Chris Carson. Now, you guys know my opinion on the Seattle running back room. It is an absolute mess. That offensive line is not great either. There are just too many question marks as to how they're going to utilize the guys that they have. Pete Carroll keeps saying, yeah, we're going to use Chris Carson. But we've seen how quickly he's willing to pull Carson because of his fumbling issues. And if they're so dead set on using him, then I also don't understand why you bring in Carlos Hyde, why you draft a running back in DJ Dallas as well. And Rashad Penny is still on the roster as well. We don't know how he's going to come back. He's presumptively going to start on the PUP list, but he's still going to be a threat to take away carries as well. So I am in no way convinced that Chris Carson will be the number one back, but he has the opportunity to. And if he is the lead guy that they go with in Seattle, he does have value. But just balancing the potential with the worry that I have that he may not get much of any look in the offense has me putting him down at 23. Again, I'm sitting about 8 or 9 spots lower than most on Carson. So generally, again, I would avoid drafting him. But he does have, again, if he's sitting around this 23rd, 24th running back spot, he might be worth the risk for you. But you definitely don't want to try to snag him where most people are drafting Carson right now. So unless you're in a draft with a bunch of other like-minded people, he's going to be gone way before that point. So I wouldn't even worry about him. Number 22 is Kareem Hunt for me. It's another guy that I have elevated quite a bit. It's obviously the second running back in Cleveland's system as of right now. Kareem Hunt, I think, is going to get a lot more opportunity than people are giving him credit for. We saw last year when when Kareem Hunt was introduced into the offense, Nick Chubb's production dropped from, I want to say, the third or fourth leading fantasy running back down to like the 20th, right? So he was already getting plenty of looks when he came off suspension last year. Now that they have an entire offseason to work with Kareem Hunt and to really figure out how they want to utilize him in the offense, I think he's going to get a lot of touches, not only out of the backfield, but in the passing game as well. Kevin Stefanski loves to use his running backs, and he has two of the best guys from a talent perspective. He has two of the best running backs in the league. He's definitely going to utilize them, and I think Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb are going to be very close as far as fantasy points go by the end of the 2020 season. Because, again, they're both talented. I firmly believe that Nick Chubb is one of the top 3 running backs in the league, but Kareem Hunt is right there with him, and Stefanski would be cheating himself if he didn't utilize both of those guys, and that's exactly what he's going to do. So Kareem Hunt all the way up at number 22 for me. Number 21 is a guy that a lot of people are still split on at this point for good reason, and it's David Johnson, the running back now for the Houston Texans. We saw him have a breakout year in 2016, the best fantasy back in the league by far. I mean, the guy was just absolutely torching teams. And then he just kind of fell out of favor right? He had some injury issues. The offensive line started to fall apart there in Arizona, and he just really never got back to that prominence. He really never even got close. He burned a lot of people for a few years, and finally Arizona was able to somehow dump him off and get DeAndre Hopkins in return, which, not even getting into that, is still baffling to me. However, now that he's in Houston, David Johnson's in a better situation right off the rip. He's got a better offensive line. He is the legitimate number one back, even with Duke Johnson out of the backfield. They're going to play two completely different roles, so I don't see him taking a whole lot away as far as touches go. And you've also got Bill O'Brien and that crazy ego of his. He has to prove that he made the right decision by trading away Hopkins to bring in David Johnson. So I can see him legitimately getting 300-plus touches this year. They're going to try to run him into the ground. They want to see what they have in David Johnson. It's kind of like a one-year audition, I feel like, for him in that offense. So he's going to be utilized quite a bit, and he has the talent, guys. We've seen it before. David Johnson can be a legitimate running back one. I think he may just have to be in the right place for it to happen. So there is some risk involved with the trade, of course, but I like David Johnson a lot this year. That's going to make him my running back 21. Now, number 20 is a guy I changed my tune on him as well a little bit. I talked about him, I think, 2 episodes ago. That's Le'Veon Bell. It's less to do with his situation as it is to other running backs you can get around this spot with Bell. He's generally going around running back 24, 25. I have him up here at running back 20 just because of his potential as a runner. Compared to other guys that are going in this range, Le'Veon Bell is by far the most talented back. I mean, you look at guys like Melvin Gordon. I've got Chris Carson back here, David Montgomery, Devin Singletary. Le'Veon Bell is better than all of those guys. The reason that he is this low is because I, like a lot of other people, have a hard time trusting the New York Jets offense. The offensive line, I don't think, has gotten a lot better, even with the addition of Mekhi Becton. I don't see that line being particularly great. I don't trust Adam Gase as a head coach either. We saw Le'Veon just not really be used properly at all last year. It burned a lot of fantasy owners, including myself. But again, in this running back 20 range, he's absolutely worth the risk for you. Even if he is not put in the best situation, Le'Veon Bell has the talent to still, score, still be the great playmaker that he is. He just has to overcome the offensive system that he's in. So again, a definite layer of risk there, but I do like Le'Veon Bell more than most again this year. Still about 10 spots lower than where he was going last year. He was going in that pick 7 to 12 kind of range. So running back 20, the guy he didn't lose everything. He still has value there. So I do like Le'Veon Bell quite a bit. Number 19 is going to be Austin Eckler, the running back for the Chargers. I've got him about 5 spots lower than most. What makes me nervous about Eckler is the fact that he doesn't really run the ball particularly well, which, yeah, he's a running back. Of course, that's a red flag. But he was a great running back last year from a fantasy perspective just because he was utilized in the passing game quite a bit. I want to say he had like 800 yards, significant amount of touchdowns. I think the statistic was 70% of his points were scored through the air. Now, the issue that I have with that is that you're going from Phillip Rivers, who, while he didn't have a particularly great year throwing the football, is going to provide you a solid amount of volume and a solid amount of scoring opportunity, to now we're going to Tyrod Taylor, who has never thrown more than, I want to say, 17 touchdown passes in a season. And how many of those are realistically going to go to the running back and not players like Keenan Allen or Hunter Henry? It's not really adding up for me for Austin Eckler. I think his production is going to drop pretty significantly. He does still have value being that excellent pass-catching back. He may be the best in the league, but he's not going to get that consistent volume that I would want out of somebody that I'm taking within my top 15 running backs. Moving on now, number 18, I have Melvin Gordon of Denver. I have him a little lower than most people are drafting him because, like I said, I'm nervous that he's not going to be utilized fully right away. He's going to have an acclimation period coming into Denver, not having a whole lot of an off-season to get worked into the offense. I think he's going to split carries a lot more with Phillip Lindsay, and Lindsay does have the potential to keep those carries throughout the year if he continues to be a productive running back. So Gordon does have value. He will be the number one guy. It might just take him some time to really get rolling out there in Denver. Number 17 for me, Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette has been disappointing as a whole since he's come into the league. However, he is the clear-cut number one back in Jacksonville. So the reason he's sitting at number 17, despite the fact that I don't think he's an elite running back, is just the fact that he's going to get an incredible amount of volume. Gardner Minshew is limited as a passer. As much as people loved to praise him last year, they're still going to want to ground and pound as much as they can and try to limit mistakes. He will lose a little bit of touches if they fall behind in games, which I think they will. The defense in Jacksonville is atrocious. But again, he's still going to get a lot of early game volume. He's going to be utilized quite a bit. And he's going to be another one of those guys like Devin Singletary, who, while he may not be a home run hitter for you, is going to provide you consistent value week in and week out. And then number 16, last guy before we break into the top 15 for me, is Jonathan Taylor. And I like Jonathan Taylor a lot, even though he is in a two running back system right now with Marlon Mack. He reminds me a lot of the Nick Chubb situation, but he has a better shot at maintaining the number one running back role, right? Marlon Mack doesn't scare me nearly as much as Kareem Hunt does, and Jonathan Taylor is by far the more talented back compared to Marlon Mack. The reason he's only at 16 now is because it's not 100% guaranteed that he's going to have that starting spot. The Frank Reich in Indianapolis still says that he really wants to use them as running back 1A and 1B, but I don't think that's going to be maintained for very long. I think Jonathan Taylor is going to show right away that he is a legitimate back in this league, and he's going to quickly take over that starting spot from Marlon Mack, so I have him at number 16. He's another guy that I'm very high on for next year, could definitely be a top 10 pick. But this year he just has to overcome Marlon Mack a little bit and really solidify his spot in that offense. So that is number 30 through 16. When we come back, guys, we are down to the top 15 running backs for the 2020 fantasy football season. You are listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, and we'll be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, BSP, Brandon Soderpenner. As you just heard last segment, we went through numbers 30 to 16 in my top 30 fantasy running backs for 2020. Also went over a couple of guys that didn't quite make the cut for me in that top 30 range. And now we are on to the top 15, the guys that are going to be the elite running backs in the fantasy world this year. Now, before we dive into those top 15, I want to give a couple of guys that, while they weren't in my top 30, are still legitimate targets for you, and I think can outperform their ADP quite a bit. So in no particular order here, the first one for me is Tariq Cohen. He has struggled the last couple of years putting up the numbers that he did his first year in the league. However, now with Nick Foles presumptively taking over that spot like I mentioned last segment. I think he's going to be utilized a lot more in that Chicago Bears offense because just Nick Foles loves targeting his backs, and Tariq Cohen is going to be one of the elite pass-catching backs in the league, so definitely going to utilize him quite a bit. For similar reasons, I also have James White, the running back for New England, on this list. Not only is Sony Michel, I think, due to not really produce much of anything this year, you do now have Cam Newton in there at quarterback instead of Jared Stidham, which I think has raised James White's ADP quite a bit already, but he's going to be used in that offense a lot. Cam Newton has a decent slew of receiving options, but there's nobody in that wide receiver room that is elite. So definitely look for James White, who is always a dangerous weapon to be brought into that offense and used with Cam Newton right off the rip. Another guy I've been talking about quite a bit and is still largely going either undrafted or being used as a flyer pick is Antonio Gibson for Washington. Now, there's still a question as to whether he's a wide receiver or a running back, but regardless, he is an offensive weapon that is going to be utilized a lot this year in Washington. He doesn't have a ton of competition in front of him if he is to take on the running back role. He has Adrian Peterson and Darius Geis, who is dangerously close to being cut from that team. And then even in the receiving room, he has Terry McLaurin and then just a bunch of guys. So no matter where they stick Antonio Gibson this year, he's going to get touches, he's going to score touchdowns, and his ADP is somewhere in the late 100s, if not in the 200s still. So I'm very high on Gibson. I think he's a guy whose value is going to shoot up dramatically in 2021. And then just of note, really quick, two of the better handcuffs in the league, if you're looking for those. I think they're pretty obvious. Latavius Murray for New Orleans and Tony Pollard in Dallas. Both are set to get very heavy workloads if either Alvin Kamara or Ezekiel Elliott were to go down. Both of those lead backs are going to be featured quite a bit in the offense, and I think Murray and Pollard have both shown to this point that they have the ability to handle those kind of workloads. So if an injury were to happen, those are guys that you immediately want to scour out on the waiver wire or, again, get at the back end of your draft as a nice little insurance policy for you. All right, guys, so enough waiting. The top 15 fantasy running backs for 2020. Number 15 for me is James Conner for the Pittsburgh Steelers. His main issue is just staying on the field. When he's on the field, he's been a solid fantasy running back. He has put up top running back numbers in a couple of weeks throughout his career. Again, he just has to stay healthy. That's been a legitimate issue for him. If he is able to stay on the field, there's really nobody there that scares me as far as taking touches from him either. So I'm looking at James Conner. Even if things go wrong in that Pittsburgh offense, which they might, because they're relying a lot on Big Ben coming back healthy, which is why I'm not super high on Juju Smith-Schuster or any of the other receivers in their wide receiver group. But I don't think that's going to affect James Conner nearly as much. If anything, if he has Duck Hodges or Mason Rudolph as his quarterback, he's going to be running the ball more. So as long as he can stay on the field, I do like James Conner quite a bit as my number 15 running back. Number 14, I have a couple spots lower than most, is Miles Sanders. This is one of those situations where his little bit of a lower ranking for me has nothing to do with how good he is as a running back. He showed last year that he is an excellent runner of the football, but Doug Peterson in Philadelphia just doesn't have a good history of utilizing a single workhorse back. He does have some potential to lose touches to Boston Scott and for them to go with the running back by committee type of role. So while he will get production, I don't think he's as clear-cut of a number one as a lot of people seem to think that he is, which just bumps him down a little bit lower to number 14 for me. Keep an eye on him early in the year. I think you're going to be able to tell right away how they're going to utilize Miles Sanders. So maybe if you do end up drafting him and you see this running back by committee type deal going on, might be best to look to trade him, maybe get a little bit of a better value for him, because I don't think they're going to shift their philosophy if that's how they decided to start it right off the rip. All right, number 13 is another guy a lot of people have been split on. It's Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley I like a lot just because he's coming into a much better situation than he was facing in Los Angeles last year. I think he's going behind a much better offensive line in Atlanta. And on top of that, he's a lot farther away from the injury now that set him back initially in that 2018 Super Bowl season. He has the arthritis still, which everyone's nervous about, but he's had this arthritis issue going on since college, and he has consistently worked through it. It's not something that is constantly bothering him. It's something that will flare up on him. And we even saw last year when Sean McVay realized halfway through the season that, hey, he can handle this workload again. He started feeding Todd Gurley the ball more, and we saw his production skyrocket. So now that Atlanta has him, they've already taken a look at his medicals and taken a look at his performances last year. They know that they're able to utilize this guy right away. So I think he's going to fit very well into that Atlanta offense. Also going to have more opportunity for touches in Atlanta, guys. Atlanta loves to throw the football, and that includes to the wide receivers. And when Todd Gurley was tearing up the league in 2016, 2017, a lot of that was through the air. So he will be utilized both with the running game and the passing game, guys. And Todd Gurley, assuming he can stay healthy and that this arthritis doesn't come back and start nagging him again, could finish as a top 5 running back. Now at number 12, this is another guy that I'm lower on, and you've heard me talk about it quite a bit. It's Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is a top 3 running back as far as talent goes, but the situation in Cleveland right now is not ideal for him to just be this elite back as far as production goes. Kareem Hunt is a real threat to take away carries. I think he's going to take away a lot more than people are giving him credit for. That doesn't mean you shouldn't draft Nick Chubb, but he's going at about running back 7 right now. I've got him 6 spots lower than that, just because while he will be productive, it's not going to be top 10 running back productive. He's going to lose touchdowns. He's going to lose a pretty significant amount of yards to Kareem Hunt, at least for this year. Kareem Hunt will be gone next year, and Nick Chubb will be back to being a top 5 running back. But the whole situation in Cleveland just makes me nervous. They're going to run the ball a lot, which is why he has value. But look for Kareem Hunt to really eat into that this year, which is, again, why I think these guys are going to finish a lot closer than people are giving them credit for. Moving on to number 11 is Aaron Jones, running back for Green Bay. This is about where he's getting picked currently. I think he's due for a little bit of regression as far as his touchdowns go. I want to say he finished with 18 last year in his campaign to being the number 2 overall fantasy running back behind only Christian McCaffrey. That's definitely not a number that I see to be repeatable this year. On top of that, you guys know my opinion on the situation in Green Bay right now, how things kind of seem to be falling apart internally, specifically between Aaron Rodgers, the coaching staff, and the front office. So that has the potential to affect Aaron Jones a little bit, not nearly as much as I believe both Rodgers and Devontae Adams will be affected in the whole situation. However, it's still something you kind of have to look at that could hurt his value later on if the team just completely crumbles. But Aaron Jones does still have some legitimate value, guys. He's not going to be a flash-in-the-pan type of deal. He was an excellent runner of the football last year. We saw Matt LaFleur want to utilize his running backs a lot more than the previous regime with Mike McCarthy, so he will get volume there as well. So Aaron Jones, definitely a very highly draftable guy. I have him sitting at number 11 right now. My number 10 back is only lower on my list because of his contract situation right now. That's Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook, if he is there in Minnesota, could be a top 5 guy, but we haven't heard a lot as far as progress goes with restructuring his contract, extending him, getting the guy paid. It just doesn't really seem to be moving right now. Now, the consensus is a lot of experts think that, yeah, he'll just be back in Minnesota, but until I get some sort of actual confirmation on that, I'm not comfortable taking him as high as a lot of the experts are at this point. We've seen the value of the running back in the league be diminished year after year, and at some point, these guys are not going to win these holdouts. You've seen guys like Zeke and Christian McCaffrey be able to hold out and come out with these excellent contracts, but the buck has to stop somewhere, and unfortunately, I think there is a legitimate risk of that happening with Dalvin Cook. I think they're confident enough in their scheme in Minnesota that they may be willing to just move on from him and move to the next guy, to either bring somebody in or just start feeding the ball to Alexander Mattison. There is a threat for that. So he's at number 10 for me just because I'm unsure about whether or not he's going to be on the field. And that's scary for me when you're talking about a potential top 5 guy. So I've got him pretty significantly lower. I'm not ever really huge on drafting the guys that are going through these contract negotiation or holdout situations, because if I'm spending that much draft capital on somebody, I want to make sure they're on the field. Even if that may bite me every once in a while, I need that assurance that I'm drafting a guy that's going to actually be getting me points and not just be sitting on my bench waiting to come back into the league. I've seen that happen way too many times with Le'Veon Bell, with Antonio Brown. It's not something I want to mess around with, and I don't plan on doing it at all moving forward. All right, so number 9 for me is Josh Jacobs, running back in Oakland. Especially if you're in a standard league, I like Josh Jacobs a lot. He's got a very underrated offensive line in front of him out there I said Oakland, didn't I? In Las Vegas. Still not used to saying that. He's got a solid line out in front of him in Vegas. We've already seen that John Gruden likes to utilize him, had a very good rookie season last year. Where he does lose value is if you're in a PPR league. He's not really utilized in the passing game a lot to begin with, and Oakland brought in a lot of other receiving options this year with Henry Ruggs, with Lynn Bowden, and Bryan Edwards. So I think those guys are going to get a lot more of the passing touches, and Josh Jacobs' production out of the backfield as far as catching the ball is just going to go down a little further. But he will get a lot of touches on the ground, and he's a talented enough guy to where I think he's going to be able to utilize those and get into the end zone quite a bit this year. So, again, especially if you're in standard leagues, definitely go for Josh Jacobs. I like him a lot, but I do think he drops quite a few spots if you are in a full PPR league. Now, up to number 8, guy I am very high on this year compared to where he's being drafted is Kenyon Drake, running back for Arizona. This is a guy that you can still get in the 3rd round in some cases right now, which is crazy to me. When he showed up in Arizona, he took over that lead role from David Johnson and just never looked back. I want to say after he arrived in Arizona, he put up the number 4 overall running back numbers for the remainder of the season. They have an excellent offense out there in Arizona with weapons all over the field now, including Kyler Murray and then DeAndre Hopkins, who they just brought in. It's going to force teams to game plan for everybody on the field and not just the running backs. That'll open things up even more for Kenyon Drake this year. The only thing that is keeping Drake out of my top 5 running backs is that offensive line. They addressed it a little bit in the draft, but for the most part, there are still a lot of holes that need to be filled there, and that could definitely limit Drake to an extent. But again, compared to where you can get him, I think he's going to give you excellent fantasy production. I think he's going to give you, I've got him at running back 8. He's going to give you round 1 production for a guy that you can get at the beginning of round 3 right now in most drafts. So definitely target Kenyon Drake. Number 7, another guy I'm a little bit higher on. You've heard me talk about him a lot. Clyde Edwards-Helaire in Kansas City. I think he just fits with that offense way too well to not be productive this year. I think he has a very good floor. He's going to have that job over Williams, I think, right off the bat. He's a very good pass-catching back, which when you have Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback, you know you're going to be throwing the ball a lot. So not only can you rely on him to run the ball and, change the tempo up, but you can also utilize him quite a bit in the passing game. He's just going to get a crazy amount of volume for a rookie running back. So I like Clyde Edwards-Helaire a lot. If you can snag him, do it. He's another guy similar to Kenyon Drake that I think can give you round 1 potential, and he's going probably mid-second round right now. So grab as many shares of Clyde Edwards-Helaire as you can. Number 6 is Derrick Henry, running back for Tennessee. I'm a little bit lower on him just because he's not going to be used in the passing game at all. So he's kind of a boomer bust player in the fact that he's going to have to rely relatively heavily on touchdowns because of that. Now, he's going to rack up yardage. We know that. But 16 touchdowns last year, he's more than likely going to regress a little bit from that, meaning that you're going to have to rely on him just getting that crazy amount of yardage from game to game. Also, one small thing you have to worry about is that last year was his best year by far. He had 500 more yards on the ground than he did in any other season, and I'm not saying that won't happen again, but it's just something you have to look at on whether or not you want to take a little bit of a risk on a guy that's going in the top 5, top 6 right now. So Derrick Henry sitting at number 6 for me just because of a couple of small red flags. Other than that, obviously an excellent runner of the football. He may not get 16 touchdowns again this year, but I think his total is still going to be very high. So again, Derrick Henry at number 6. Number 5 is Joe Mixon. He for Cincinnati finally started to really break out last year. Now with Joe Burrow manning that offense, it's going to take pressure off of him. The last few years, defenses have really only had to game plan for Joe Mixon. That offense in Cincinnati has been dreadful. And especially last year without A.J. Green, there was no other weapons that anybody had to worry about. And Joe Mixon still had an excellent year. Now that he has Joe Burrow there, now that their offensive line is coming back completely healthy, Joe Mixon has a legitimate shot at finishing as a top 5 running back. I firmly believe that he will. And this is going to be the year that finally sets him in that elite running back group. Also doesn't have any real competition for carries either. He has Giovanni Bernard, who is still there, which I didn't even realize until I started doing some research. He's only getting older and older. He gets a couple carries here and there, but definitely not a threat to Mixon. So Joe Mixon, clear number 1 guy in Cincinnati, is due for an excellent 2020 campaign. Number 4 for me, guys, Alvin Kamara of New Orleans. I know he burned a lot of people last year. I talked about this in my bounce back players. I believe it was last episode. But Kamara only having 4 touchdowns, that's not going to happen again, guys. For how much they utilize him in the run and pass games, he is going to accidentally stumble into 8 touchdowns this year at least, right? So, and he also had some injury issues he was dealing with last year. It was the first year that he really had any kind of missed time with that. He played through some of those. And even with all of that going on, he still finished as running back 12. So with him coming back healthy, with Drew Brees getting a little bit older and probably not able to sling the ball down the field as much this year, Kamara is going to be leaned on quite a bit. So despite what happened in 2019, Kamara is a safe top 5 running back for me. And again, I like him a lot. He's going to just get you a ton of production, both in the run and pass game out there in New Orleans. Number 3 for me is Saquon Barkley. Now, he is generally the consensus number 2 for most people, and I understand that. He's an absolute freak when he's carrying the football. However, just looking at the other 2 guys that I have above him, he's just going to have a little bit of a harder time putting up consistent fantasy points. We've already seen him have to deal with injury his second year in the league. I commend him. He did play through those injuries, but it obviously impacted him quite a bit. And that offense is just not good, guys. There are no receivers that anybody should be afraid of in New York. Daniel Jones, while he had a decent rookie season, he showed some things that you can build off of, is definitely not an established passer yet. So everything's going to fall back onto Saquon, which is great because he'll get excellent an amount of touches. He'll get volume, right? But when the defense is solely focusing on him and he doesn't have an excellent offensive line in front of him, it's going to be hard for him to put up number 2 overall numbers. I like him at 3. He's going to have a ton of fantasy points this year, and he'll be an excellent pick. But it's just those couple small things that had me bump him down to number 3 instead of that number 2 spot. Now, number 2. I talked myself into this. I can't believe I'm... Okay. Christian McCaffrey is my number 2 running back for 2020. And I understand the amount of backlash I am probably going to get for that. Christian McCaffrey is the most talented running back in the league. And if he plays the entire season, will finish as the number 1 running back. But that's the problem, guys. The minute that he has the slightest injury, he's getting pulled, and he's going to end up sitting way longer than he needs to. Carolina, whether they want to admit it or not, they know they are going into a full rebuild here. They want Trevor Lawrence. They want Justin Fields. They want one of these guys in the 2021 draft. And Christian McCaffrey is going to make it a little bit harder for them to tank, and they want to protect their asset. They just invested a ton of money into this guy. So the minute they have any excuse to pull him, once they've lost 10 games or so, they're going to pull him off the field, and he's going to sit.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.